All right, so I've been doing this photo shoot with Mia Blakeman, and Leah's like,
I think it could use some fill light.
and I guess in my mind I thought, can't we just do that in Photoshop? Isn't that what the shadow slider is for? And so to kind of see who is right in this debate we're having, we're gonna put this to the test. Okay, our key light is a 3-foot gridded octabox off to the side. Go ahead and give me a pose. 3, 2, 1. And as you can see from this shot, part of her face is in deep shadow and the other part is being nicely lit. So now that we have our base image with no fill light, let's go ahead and add the fill light. We're gonna use another B10 here. And I'm going to fire this into the back of our garage door. And the idea is that the bigger the fill light, the softer it is and the more detail it's gonna pull out, but it's not really gonna be noticeable. So I have this light set to 5. And as you can see, even on the back of the screen, it's definitely bringing out some detail. On the dark side of her face, you can see the hair behind her. All right, so let's take these 2 photos into Photoshop. Now, before we look at these images side by side, this video is sponsored by Click-a-Snap. Click-a-Snap is a brand new social media platform where you get paid every single time someone looks at your images. It's kind of like 1 part Instagram, 1 part Shutterstock, 1 part Google AdSense, all wrapped up into one. Of course, the most unique element of Click-a-Snap is that you can get paid 0.7 cents every time one of your images is viewed. Unlike other social media platforms, with Click-a-Snap, you don't lose any of your imaging rights, you don't have to figure out how to game an algorithm, and there's no data harvesting or selling to third-party entities. Now, Click-a-Snap's website has been running as a prototype for about a year now, but they have a brand new website coming out very soon. Just a few analytics, they have over 3 million users with 5,000 new users joining every single day. So if you're a photographer looking for a new way to display your images and a social media platform like this interests you, head over to clickasnap.com/getpaid to make your own account. All right, with our sponsorship out of the way, let's get into these images and see if you can tell the difference. So I'm gonna put all 3 of these on the screen. This first image is straight out of camera. This is just the 1 light setup with the octabox to the left. And now these next 2 images that I've added, one of them was shot with the real actual practical fill on location, bouncing a strobe off the wall behind me. And the second image is simply taking the first image and then pulling up the shadows. Can you tell which one is which? Let's zoom in to 100%. Now maybe you can tell? All right, well, let's go ahead and reveal how I did this little test. Now, before we dive in and look even more specifically at these 2 images, I do want to say that I had to tweak the images just a little bit because there would be a few telltale signs that would have made this comparison not fair at all. So let me show you what those are. So here is our base image, and using this color balance selector tool, I was able to very meticulously measure different shades of her face and her dress in the background. And what I found was if I bump up my shadows all the way to 98, and then just slightly tweak the highlights, whites, and blacks, and a little bit of texture and clarity, I could get her face to look almost the same tonality as the image where we used the real fill on location. But the problem is, if you compare these 2 images, obviously there's 2 huge glaring issues. The first issue is that the background is a different tonality altogether. They're not the same color. And then the second issue is that her dress now is being affected by that shadow slider, and it's starting to look gray. When we added the fill light, it brought up the shadows on her face, but as you can tell from this image versus the image without the fill, the black levels on her dress really aren't that different. So let me just show you what I did, because Lightroom now offers masking, which is the most mind-blowing thing that Lightroom's done, I think, in a long while. And I learned this technique while filming Jirsa's Lightroom course. So if you want to learn how to use everything in Lightroom, including really valuable mask tools, definitely check that out. I'll put a link in the description. So here's the base image that I have, and if I come up here to masking, I made 3 different masks. I'm just gonna quickly go through these. The first mask is just to adjust the background, and again, I used the white balance selector tool to try to make this as perfect and precise as possible. So I was able to turn the background from this dark gray to the exact gray in the comparison image. And then if I go to mask 2 and show you what that does, this is a selection for the model. This was used to bring up those shadows, so I bumped those up to 98. If I turn this one on and off, it's making the comparison that we want with the shadows on her face, but it's making the shadows on her dress look super unrealistic. So the third and final mask that I created is this one here, which is a mask just for the dress. So I removed all of that shadow recovery out of her dress. And what I'm left with now, if I turn this one on and off, is I'm left with an image that looks like we used fill light on her face, but we did it all in software. So what I've done is I've stacked all three of these images in Photoshop so that we can turn them on and off, and I've tried to line them up as close as possible. So here's the Photoshop document here. Let's go ahead and dive into this so that you can see when you might want to add a real practical light and when you might be able to just bump up the shadows and get a similar effect. So here are the two images. I've zoomed in on her face so that we can really see what it's doing a little more clearly. And I'm just gonna toggle between the two of these. And you can see the density and the shadows on her face are pretty similar. I tried to match these as well as I possibly could. Let me go and turn off all of them and see where we started with. So it's pretty incredible to think that you could take an image like this with one light and then just using Lightroom, you could pull up that much detail out of the shadows. It wasn't that long ago that you couldn't really do this with a DSLR camera and software. If you would have pulled the shadows up this much, they would have been really noisy and they just would have looked really bad. And so this was kind of the basis of why I thought maybe we don't even need fill light anymore. So this is the no fill, and then this is the fake fill. And let's go ahead and turn on the real fill and toggle between the two. Now the first thing you're probably gonna notice is you're gonna say, Patrick, why does the real fill not have the reflected fill light, catch light in her eyes? And that's because I actually pulled a quick one on a lot of people. I removed that in Photoshop so that when I showed people off camera these two comparisons, they wouldn't be able to zoom right in and immediately be like, that's the fill light and that's the fake one. So this image should have a second catch light in the eyes, but I went ahead and removed that. Yes, sneaky little trick there. So now that we're up close and personal here, let's turn these on and off and see what's going on here. Now there is a little bit of difference in sharpness. I don't know if I missed focus or if changing some of the settings in Lightroom softened one image over the other, but I'm not really looking at that. What I'm looking at are these specular highlights on her cheek right here. If I turn that on and off, it feels like the fill light looks a little more natural and it's filling in the pores a little bit better, whereas the one where I just bumped up the shadows, there's no specular highlights right here, and overall it just looks a little muddier. If I turn these on and off, look at this cheekbone right here. This is interesting. With the real fill, we just get some more definition. So here's where we were, here's the real fill. There's definitely more detail there. But then if I turn on the fake fill and compare them, look at this. You're getting this weird little highlight right here. And it's not just on the cheekbone. If we come down to her neck, look at this little highlight on her chin, and then look at all this warm light that's being reflected into her neck. Let's go to the real fill light, and you can see that highlight on her chin is almost gone. And the fill light that's in her neck, it's not warm. It doesn't look like bounce light. It just looks like a little bit more detail. And so I shared this with a couple other professional photographers, and we were all kind of talking about this. We think maybe this highlight is just the reflection from the white seamless, or actually it might be some bounce light from her hair that's reflecting back into her chin. But when you take the base image right here and then you bump all of the shadows up, you're not selectively choosing between some of those deep highlight shadows and the darkest shadows. You're just kind of bringing everything up. And so in doing that, you wind up with this weird like fill light that's on her chin. It's also over here on the left eye of our picture, and it's also over here on this right cheekbone. It just looks really, really strange. And I think that, to me, is the biggest difference between these two images, is just the amount of fill light that's being added in an unnatural way. Zoom out a little bit more. Is there any other differences here? I don't know if you can really see this or it really even matters. Maybe if you're a product photographer, you would care about this, but the clasp on her necklace, this has this nice little highlight that's running the length of it. That is caused by the fill light hitting the clasp dead on. If I turn off our real fill light, you can see the fake fill does not have that highlight. It only has the highlight from the softbox to the left. So that's a pretty big difference there. Although again, unless you're shooting reflective surfaces, I don't know that that's really gonna make a big difference. It would be interesting to do the same test with darker skin, because sometimes darker skin reflects specular highlights a little differently than lighter skin like this. So maybe it would make a difference there. All right, finally, let's take a look at the blacks on her dress. I tried to match these up closely in Lightroom so that they would be kind of a fair comparison. Again, the whole point of making these match isn't to fool you guys. It's to see that if you took an image without fill light, Could you, in post-processing, make it look like you used fill light? So don't think that because I darken the dress that this is some kind of unfair comparison. I'm simply trying to say, can we add fill to the parts of the body that we want to and eliminate fill from other parts? So here's the real fill light, and then here's the fake fill. These almost look identical. Maybe the fake fill does have a little bit more definition in the shadows. You can see some of the wrinkles in her dress a little bit better, where the fill light actually does flatten the image just a touch. You can also see it with her hand. Her hand here has a little bit more detail and specular highlights on her fingers. If we turn that off, it's a little bit more contrasty on her hands. And then of course, if you really wanted to look, you could zoom into her fingernails. That's another shiny surface. And I can immediately tell that this doesn't have the fill light because it has one specular highlight. And if I turn on the real fill light, you can see that secondary little highlight does show up. Again, super minor. I don't think that's really a big deal. We also see it over here in her thumb. The real fill light, this image, has a little bit more specular highlight on her thumb. And if we turn it off, it's just a little flatter. So there you go. Did you guys guess correctly? And in looking at these images small, does it make sense to use a fill in your work? I know a lot of photographers live and die by adding a huge fill behind the camera to kind of achieve this effect, but one thing that I did find interesting was I shared these images with a few professional photographer friends of mine and professional retouchers, and here are some of the responses that I got. One of my photographer friends said, I really can't tell much of a difference at all, at least significantly, when I look at the images small. And I don't think my clients really would know the difference. So I don't think for me, I would really go through the hassle of adding a fill light to get such small results when I could just do it in Lightroom. Another photographer friend of mine said, it's absolutely obvious. I think the one where you bumped up the shadows looks super fake and weird and it just doesn't sit right with me. One of my architectural friends, he had kind of the most interesting comment. He said, I don't think any of this lighting really makes a difference at all. Really all that matters is that you get a super hot model. That's the most important thing in photography. He might be right on that. And then finally, I sent this off to a professional retoucher friend of mine who has done really high-end magazine covers. And he was just saying that he doesn't really think that it's worth adding a fill light. Remember, you have to buy a second strobe, you have to set it up, you have to get it in the right place. It's a whole other level of production, especially if you're out on location. And he was saying, although my example is pretty good, he's like, I can do this even better using Photoshop. I don't know why I would go through the hassle of buying that extra strobe and setting all that up unless I wanted to impress my client. And in many cases, more lights and showing a difference like this on set can impress your clients. It can allow you to charge more money and it kind of elevates you and makes people think that you're a better photographer. So in his mind, he was saying, do it all in post, but if you want to have that high-end production value, maybe you do it on location. So there you go. Does fill light make a difference in your photos, or can you fake it in post-production? I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Do you use fill light on location, or do you just bump up your shadows in post-production? If you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you subscribe to the link down below. We're trying to hit 1 million subscribers this year, and we're so very, very, very close. So definitely subscribe and hit that bell if you want to help us out. If you enjoy this kind of content, but maybe you can't watch videos all the time, head over to fstoppers.com where we have a full blog featuring all kinds of cool new gadgets and tools that are coming out for photographers. And if you're just getting into photography, or maybe you're already a professional in another genre, and you want to learn from some of the best photographers in the world, head over to fstoppers.com/store where we have full-length tutorials, some of them 10 hours, some of them even 20 hours, on all genres of photography, including headshots, swimwear, architecture, landscape, product photography, macro photography. We even created a new tutorial called The Well-Rounded Photographer, where you can learn from 10 different photographers in one tutorial, so you can figure out what genre of photography you might want to specialize in. Definitely check that out. And if you enjoyed this video about fill light, I have another fill light video coming out very soon where we examine, does it matter where you place your fill? Putting it right over your camera, putting it on the shadow side, maybe putting it on the same side as your key light. So stay tuned because I'm really interested to see the results on that.